Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about militant atheism. The sort of atheism that insists it's not militant because they're not violent and not throwing bombs. Unfortunately, they actually are violent these days, and there has been a disturbing trend in an uptick in hate crimes aimed specifically at Christians, which we are either expected to not know about or to ignore. Or if we bring it up, well, we are told that Jews have more hate crimes aimed against them, so Christians should shut up. Because apparently, because Jews have it worse, Christians should not complain about the hate crimes directed at them. And of course, if you say that there is no reason why a Christian can't complain about hate crimes aimed at them, you're being anti-Semitic. You also prove that you have the Christian persecution complex. Because apparently a man getting shot in the throat at a funeral, or children being shot to death in a Nashville school, are not major concerns. In fact, children being shot to death in a school is hilarious fodder for jokes about how prayer doesn't work. And if you don't think so, well, it's obvious that you're anti-Semitic, because the person who famously made those sorts of jokes claimed he only removed them from his Twitter account due to anti-Semitic attack. You see how awful those Christians are. So let's not kid ourselves. When I say militant atheism, I am not saying people who merely lack belief in a god. I'm talking about people who hate Christianity. Even though they will inevitably say that they don't hate Christians, they do. They hate all Christians. So whenever they tell you they have family and friends they deeply love who are Christian, they are simply lying. But all their lies are scripted, and I know them all as well. Including the, you must think you're a mind reader, I find it hilarious that you think you know my thoughts and beliefs better than I do. Or, if you tell them that in advance, I don't think it's funny or hilarious. I find you sad and pathetic. Something along those lines. And the reason I'm putting all this in the front, by the way, is to make people aware that I am very already uncertain debt. Aware of all of the scripted dialogue. And, of course, to inform you of another slight problem that has nothing to do with the atheist community, or the self-described skeptic community. You'll notice, for instance, that a moment ago I said something that sounded rather bizarre. And I did. And I left it in the video. This is because I am trying to not disturb the rhythm of a very protective person called Al Gore, who has decided to single people out who sound like people who are the enemies, to whom he is now pledged to combat. This is also why I shall have some slurred speech and some odd pronunciations, pauses, and drawn-out moments. I will explain more about that on a different venue. But for now, just know that I will sound very odd at times. The word choices I use will often employ euphemisms, and even when I don't, the way I pronounce words or the exact way I structure my sentences, while I am hoping that my human audience understands them, will be distorted. Now, I am working on a way to walk a balance between understandability and distortion. So I may accidentally make it too distorted in places, but I am hoping that it's smooth enough for you to understand what it is I am saying. With apologies. But having said that, one of the most interesting things that I have discovered over the years about the self-declared skeptic community, which is what they call themselves, is that they prefer the chameleon method, as it is called, where they claim two contradictory things are true. Not at the same time, though. Where they will say, I am X, when it suits their purposes, when they think they will be praised for being X, when being X is better than being Z, and when Christians are Z, or religious people are Z, or theists are Z, they are X. But if one were to be critical of X, they are not X, they are Y. And a good deal of the time, if you say they are X or are critical of X, it will be the Christians who are X. By the way, that part isn't odd speech. That is using X as a placeholder, as you will find in algebra. But a good example of that would be that they will simultaneously expect us to believe that atheists merely lack belief in a god, and since they are atheists, they merely lack belief in a god, which not only means they make no claims and have no burden of proof as to whether God exists, which also, by the way, extends to anything else they talk about. They never have the burden of proof on anything, but also means that there's no unity within atheists. That atheists are a herd of cats. They go everywhere. No two atheists are alike. And of course, if you spend much time discussing things with the self-proclaimed skeptics of the atheist community, you soon discover that this is not really true, but they will never address what you see. They will only fall back on word definitions. But then, if talking amongst themselves, or talking about how the world will be better with them under it, or how they contrast to Christians, or the religious, as they say, you will inevitably find them claiming to hold certain values, principles and beliefs. Atheists believe in science. Atheists think that one should be compassionate because you care about other people, not to win brownie points to get salvation. Atheists believe in improving human conditions, unlike the religious who think suffering is just a part of life. Atheists believe this, atheists believe that. And they will even outright state, atheists hold to humanist values. It can't be both, though. You can't be a herd of cats going everywhere with nothing in common with other atheists but your lack of belief in a god, and have a shared belief in science and reason and compassion and, above all, truth. You can't all desire humanist values and not value anything at all in common. And they do the same thing with Christians. They will condemn Christians for believing certain things, like not caring about the environment because the rapture is going to come soon, and why bother caring about something to be destroyed? Or worse, they're actively working to create the end times, and how evil they are for actively working to destroy the world. Or, you don't need to protect the environment because it was created by God to be exploited by man, so man naturally can't destroy it. It was for man by man, and man is all that matters and can do whatever he wants to the environment. When pointed out that Christians don't believe this, they will invariably tell you that there are some Christians who believe it. In the case that I just told you, there isn't. There are no Christians who believe that. And even if I'm wrong about that, and there are, the vast, overwhelming majority don't. And they condemn all Christians for it. They will then turn around and actually tell you that Christianity is not one religion but several. It's Christianities, not Christianity. And how there is no belief held in common between Christians. Oddly, they will use this Christian diversity both as an argument against Christianity, which at least has some understandable basis, but also as a defense for claiming that Christians can be rightly criticized based upon believing certain things. The problem is they are condemning all Christians for something that at best only a few believe. why should all Christians be condemned for beliefs that most Christians don't hold? The only way that argument works as a condemnation of Christianity is if, by its very definition, Christianity must adhere to it. Being more charitable, you may say that if the majority of Christians believe something is true, then it's a good condemnation. It's valid to condemn. Even if it is not essential. But when you condemn Christianity for the views of a minority of Christians, or worse, when you condemn Christianity for views no Christian holds, it is not fair. And that's the situation we're in, though, where we have to accept that there are no beliefs that Christians hold in common, and yet all Christians are guilty of what any other Christian does, because they all have the same religion and all have the same beliefs. We have to accept that atheists have nothing in common with each other but a lack of belief in a God, yet atheists have certain humanist values and principles in common. In reality, of course, the skeptic community does a disservice with these sorts of arguments. And while they will invariably say I am condemning all atheists, I'm really not. The problem I'm discussing is not atheism. The problem I am discussing has to do with militant atheism, which in reality is a form of secular humanism. That is why so many of them belong to secular humanist organizations, and why so many of them speak of humanist values, and why, even if they are not formally members of such organizations, they nevertheless draw their information from them, such as Free Inquiry, a website, or the Freedom from Religion Foundation website, or Internet Infidels, or various other sites like that. You see, contrary to their claim, they do, in fact, have sources of information that they go to that are not primary, and are not even secondary in the traditional sense, but are internal. Whether formally recognized or not, whether formally true or not, they have an informal group alignment, in much the same way evangelical Christians do in the modern world, where it is irrelevant if you go to this or that denomination, you are likely reading the same sorts of books, the books that you would get at a right-wing Christian bookstore, or where you will listen to popular pastors or other sorts of people on YouTube, whether or not they go to your specific denomination, as they would call it, and where there's a certain level of exchange going on that holds a unity together. It is irrelevant if you formally belong to any of these organizations or not, if you are still consuming their media, and if you are still professing the same ideas, because there is still a uniformity of beliefs that comes with that. It may not be totally uniform, but it is nevertheless uniform. And I'm not going to pretend it's not true for the self-declared skeptic community simply because they claim to merely lack belief in a God, nothing more, nothing less, when it obviously is true because they also claim to hold to humanist values and describe what a skeptic is and what it means to be an atheist. Just as I'm not going to pretend Christianity is harmful to people's mental health, because Christians are ableists who tell disabled people they just need to work harder, and if they have issues, it's because they weren't praying hard enough, and they didn't believe hard enough, and are choosing to sin, and how this creates anxiety, fear, and guilt, and doubt, which causes mental problems to grow worse, and how atheists are filled with compassion and empathy and with understanding and would never tell that to disabled people, while they ridicule me for randomly capitalizing words when I type, even after I told them it's not random, even after I told them I follow a pattern where I capitalize nouns, modifiers, and certain key words, and even after I explain to them I'm legally blind and dyslexic, and I do this to help keep track of the words. You see, they ignore my explanation and continue to say I randomly capitalize words. And I suppose if the super smart atheist community can't see a pattern, there is none, and it's just random. And it's all because of my Christian homeschooling, and how I'm stupid, and how I have bad grammar, and how I need to learn proper capitalization. They ridicule me for my disability while telling me that it is Christians who ridicule people for being disabled. I have never had a Christian ridicule me for randomly capitalizing words. I have never had a Muslim ridicule me for randomly capitalizing words. I have never had a Jew ridicule me for randomly capitalizing words. I've had the tribe of atheists do it. And they are a tribe. The reason I'm ridiculed for that by so many others isn't because they identify me randomly capitalizing words as individuals. It is because they see others do it, and they always say the same things. What's the deal with the random capitals? Or, I make it a policy not to listen to people who don't even know proper capitalization. Or, after copying and pasting some lame arguments they got from a ridiculous atheist website to discredit Christianity and prove how stupid the Bible is, saying, I hope this helps with your confusion. But if it doesn't, I can retype it in random capitals like you prefer to. Isn't it a knee slapper? They're ridiculing me for my random capitals. I really should learn proper grammar. The hilarity is they keep talking about my bad grammar when they're actually talking about syntax, and syntax is not grammar. All the while, they spell God in lowercase g when using it as a name, which is bad grammar. And they always justify it with the same stupid excuse of, God is not a name, God is a title. God is not a title, by the way. A title is a social position or holding that society confers on you. And the reason God is called God is not because of his position that he holds. It's because of his nature. And they like comparing the Christian God, Yahweh, with Zeus and Thor and Odin. But Zeus is not someone who holds the title of God. He is a god by nature. Of course, the Greek and Roman gods were not the same sort of thing that Christians worship, but the atheist community is too stupid to understand that. If you were to point that out and point out that God is a creator god and they are not, all they'll do is post a link to a Wikipedia page, or perhaps copy the list on Wikipedia of creator gods, and they actually think that this is enough to silence the objection, even though they don't actually understand what the objection is. You see, the objection isn't, well, Zeus is a sky god, and Neptune is an ocean god, but mine's a god of creation, and that's different. Being a typical theist and typical Christian, I'm creating a distinction that isn't really there. They're all just gods. They're all these supernatural anthropomorphic beings. They're all the same. But fine, since your God is a god of creation instead of a god of an ocean or a god of a sky, here's other religions who have gods of creation. And they don't seem to realize it's not just that Yahweh, the Christian God, is a god of creation. It is that the other gods could not create. And that is a fundamental difference. You see, Zeus and Thor and Odin and Horus were all products of nature. Which sounds odd, since by definition gods are supernatural beings, but in reality there is no reason why we should accept that by definition gods are supernatural. The concept of the supernatural, no, not just the word. I'm going to say this in advance. A lot of atheists responded, so they didn't have the word supernatural, but they had the concept. No, they didn't. The Greek and Roman gods were not supernatural beings who weren't referred to as supernatural because they didn't have the word. They were natural beings. They were part of the natural world and the natural order. The term supernatural in medieval theology referred only to God, and it's not because they stripped other gods of their supernatural status. It's because the term and concept come from Christianity, or perhaps Judaism, but not very well developed in Judaism. To be fair, it wasn't developed in Christianity until, again, the Middle Ages. But that's the point. A supernatural being is a being who is superior to or above nature. And the Greeks and Romans did not believe their gods to be above nature. In fact, the Greek and Roman gods were nature. They were the personifications of nature. The stories about them became muddled and confused over time as societies developed and new ideas came in, while the older stories continued to circulate with new explanations and new concepts being added to the overall scheme of things, as well as some ideas being lost to the mists of time. But the one thing that has remained constant is that the gods were not simply supernatural beings controlling a natural force that was independent of them. They were that natural force. Indeed, it wasn't until later antiquity, roughly 200 or 300 years before the coming of Christ perhaps, that the poets and philosophers began shifting more toward a monotheistic view, and where even when they didn't go monotheistic, the ideas began to circulate about them, and the belief in the gods began to be simplified, at first in the masses and then in certain poets, to where the gods were assigned roles in nature. After the overthrow of the Titans, the Olympians were assigned roles, and where Hephaestus forged the thunderbolts used by Zeus, for instance. But if you look at earlier storylines and earlier mythos, you quickly learn that when you go back to the pre-Hellenic myths especially, the gods were not separate things that existed in a supernatural world. They were part of the integrated world we live in. And by part of it, I don't just mean they existed in our natural world. They were the natural world. Gaia, one of the primordials, was the earth. She wasn't simply a goddess who controlled the earth. She was the earth. Uranus, her son and husband, was the sky. Not simply the god of the sky, but the sky. And that isn't true with God as he is understood in Judaism or in Christianity, even though the same sorts of pseudo-skeptical atheist websites will claim that he was a volcano god or a sky god or something, and claim he evolved and had a wife and all that. And I'm not going to go into the history of it now. I will do another video in the future, so even though you will no doubt accuse me of dodging the issue, keep in mind I am very focused on making a very different point. So I don't want to derail it too much. The point I'm making, though, is that even if it were true that Yahweh was only one god of many, or that it was a volcano god or a sky god or what have you, by the time we have developed Judaism that we can recognize consistently, and by the time we get to Christianity, the idea definitely was not that he was a volcano god or a sky god or one god of many. And it's not really true that he was ever a volcano god or a sky god. Those are silly claims that you saw people come up with in the 19th century, but again, I'll go into that later. But I do want to make very clear that I'm not conceding to that point. But what I am doing is explaining the issue with you. But right now what's important is what people actually believe currently. And what they believed in certain time periods, such as in the 1st century when Christianity emerged. When people talk about Christianity, they're not talking about a volcano god, they're not talking about a sky god, they're talking about God as creator of the universe. And ultimately, the God Christians worship is a transcendental being who does not exist within the confines of nature. Unless, of course, one embraces pantheism, but even then, God would be the totality of nature, not simply an aspect of it. So, it's really a poor comparison to show any other god. And as for other creator gods, well, it depends on which one you're talking about, but traditionally, Christians have not viewed religion in the same way the militant atheists of the self-declared skeptic community do. And keep in mind, the self-declared skeptic community actually thinks of Christians as viewing religion in exactly the same way they do, except their own. It's actually a rather common argument. It is the basis of the Outsider's Test of Faith by John Loftus, which was really cribbed from somewhere else, but so was everything else John Loftus ever did. But the point being made is, they think Christians view all other religions as simply false, as fairy tales, and as obviously not true, and the stories from their holy books as silly, nonsensical idiocy that would not be believed by a sane and rational person. But then they do not apply the same standards of critical thinking and logic to their own religion and their own holy book as they do other religions. And they also have the idea in the self-declared skeptic community that religions are package deals, where you either believe everything in the religion or else you believe none of the religion. And that isn't how Christians have typically approached it. Christians have typically thought of other religions as containing at least some truth. Rather than view them as simply false religions, they view them as admixtures of truth and error. And when it comes to Protestantism, especially in the modern world, they will often admit that they themselves can be wrong, because quite contrary to the way the self-declared skeptic community claims they think, you don't really find them going about saying, my church is the one true church, we have the one true interpretation of the Bible, and only we are right, and our church is without error and infallible, and all the other churches are wrong and infidels and heretics. Not in the modern Protestant world, and certainly not with the evangelicals they mostly focus their ire on. What you see in the Catholic Church isn't even quite like that. But that's the thing, they don't try and understand them. You see, it is quite often that one, when reading Christian works, discovers that they actually thought of creator gods in other religions as simply a localized understanding of the same god they worshipped. And when you look at certain works of the Church Fathers, medieval theologians, or modern-day Protestants, you don't even necessarily find them saying that all the other gods like Zeus and Thor and Odin simply did not exist. Rather, they would say that they did exist, but... And there's a variety of explanations that are used for them. I'm not claiming there's uniformity, and in fact, there doesn't even have to be. You could actually believe all three explanations are true. Perhaps not on an individual-by-individual case, such as Zeus is explanation 1, 2, and 3 together. But you could believe that, over the course of history, certain things were attributed to Zeus from 1, certain other things from 2, and certain other things from 3, or you could also believe Zeus is 1, and only 1, and not 2 or 3, but Odin is 2, and not 1 or 3. What I mean by that is this. The three typical explanations one would hear, and I am being very broad, there are more nuances, and perhaps even other ideas that I'm not covering for brevity, which may sound odd considering how long my videos are. But the three general ideas that one gets are either that the other gods were demons, or perhaps angels who were mistaken for gods. The idea that they were actually humans who were deified and had legends added to them. Or the idea that they are simply forces of nature, being explained by being given a more personable identity. In all three explanations, one need not deny the existence of these gods, while at the same time one is not regarding them as gods. You see the same thing in the modern world, where certain people, like Stitchin, have proposed that aliens coming down from other worlds were mistaken for gods. I'm not proposing that we consider that theory in this video. I'm simply bringing it up. The point being made is that rather than simply dismissing all these stories of the supernatural from other holy books, Christians have typically believed that there was at least some truth to them. As C.S. Lewis said, to be a Christian is not necessarily to reject everything in all other religions. One only need reject that which contradicts Christianity. So, rather than understanding Christianity as the one true religion, with all others being false in the simplistic, ham-fisted way the self-declared skeptic community claims, what you end up with is a situation where Christians think their religion is actually true and reflects the things about the real world that other people can know about, either through their own revelation from God, albeit imperfect, or perhaps through discovery, or even by revelation, but not from God. And again, it can even be discovered by observing nature, human condition. Truth, after all, is truth, and we would expect some truth in every world religion. We would not expect them to simply be false. And yet, that is exactly what the self-appointed skeptic community declares about Christianity all the time. And it simply isn't true. This is not how St. Augustine described other religions. This is not how Thomas Aquinas described other religions. And I'm using the word religions as they do, because they don't really seem to understand that the concept of religion they're working with didn't really exist until the 1500s. Certainly people worshipped gods and had temples and all that. But the idea of having a special field of human endeavor that is distinct and separate, called religion, was something that did not exist in antiquity. To study religion in ancient Greece would be no different than studying philosophy or studying civics, because to them there was simply no distinction between them. Philosophy, in a way, then, would be the only thing we could look to that would be the equivalent of theology in the ancient world. Simply because it was the philosophers who discussed the gods. It was a philosopher who would discuss if there was one god or many. There were no dedicated theologians, and there were no dedicated religious clerics doing so, because even the priesthoods in the ancient world were less concerned with philosophical questions than with actually performing certain rites. And while one could certainly be both a philosopher and a priest, the fact is that they are still distinct. This began to change only, at least as far as the greater world was concerned, with the advent of Christianity. Now, Christians don't get to take the credit for it, to be honest. This was actually a long-standing practice in Judaism, and Christianity did begin as an offshoot of Judaism. It actually began as what we would call a sect in Judaism, if you want to be rather demeaning these days. No different than the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Essenes or other groups within the Jewish community. However, toward the end of the first century, such hostilities existed, at least at an ideological and sometimes at a physical level, between Judaism and Christianity, that the Christians and the Jews parted ways, and generally it is dated to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. But after that destruction, after the temple was gone, Judaism and Christianity were understood as distinctly separate belief systems, from our point of view, different religions. Nevertheless, the Jewish tradition of having the rabbis debate topics and discuss themes of God distinctly and in a way that, while it's difficult to articulate from the point of view of an ancient world, was still fundamentally different in some aspects than the philosophers, is what brought forth this tradition within Christianity. And keep in mind, the Jews would often look to philosophers, but so too would Christians. And they had no problem doing so. It's not that they were plagiarizing, as the self-described skeptic community says. They would have no ability to understand that they're not supposed to mix philosophy and religion, or that the Christian religion has to be self-contained and purely Christian, because to them they are simply exploring truth, not religion. And it is ultimately our idea that philosophy and religion are distinct, and that religion is not supposed to investigate truth but remain internal, that allows us to foster the idea that religion is not about truth, and thus religion is not true. In reality, the people in the ancient world never understood religion to be about anything other than reality. And it's not just that they thought their old holy book was true and they believed without evidence what their priest said. Rather, they believed it addressed the real world, and they had no compunctions about going to other sources. Bizarrely, the self-declared skeptic community has this weird idea that Christians were always based on belief that the Bible is the one and only holy book written by the creator of the universe. And they also tend to operate on the idea that all religions are like Christianity, having a holy book they think the creator of the universe wrote. Of course, the holy books claim to be the only holy book written by the creator of the universe, and they make claims that contradict each other. And in fact, even in a given holy book like the Bible, you will find contradictions in it. And this is what causes conflict and division, and why religion is ever so evil, while at the same time, since it's a holy book you think the creator of the universe wrote, you're not allowed to question, yada yada yada. The truth, of course, is that most religions don't have a holy book equivalent to the Bible. There are some that do, but most don't. And even though people like Sam Harris said they were, and Sam Harris is the divine prophet most holy, who can say no wrong, for he speaks the holy word of reason and truth and O God, he was wrong about this. He didn't know what he was talking about. And even in the context of Protestant Christianity, the belief is not that the Bible contains all truth about every topic. Not even the evangelicals or the dreaded fundamentalists think that way. And it certainly isn't true of the mainline Protestants or the Catholic Church. And ultimately, it's the Catholic Church as well as the Orthodox churches that we would have to look to, because the Protestants would not have been around in the first few centuries of Christianity. And the Catholic Church has never believed that the Bible is the sole source of authority for matters of religion, and they certainly have never believed that the Bible is the sole source of authority for all truth. Rather, that is a Protestant idea. Protestants have what's called the two Protestant distinctives. It's a bit misleading to call them that now, but I suppose that for historical purposes they are. The Protestant distinctives are salvation by faith alone, and belief that the Bible is the sole source of authority in matters of faith and practice. Catholics don't accept either of those propositions. And they are propositions that the supposed intellectual skeptic community, composed primarily of disaffecting Christians who were once deeply committed to their faith until they read the Bible and became atheists, never seem to understand what is actually being said by these terms. For instance, they think salvation by faith alone means salvation by believing alone, as if thinking something is true is what saves you. And specifically, thinking the stories in the Bible about Jesus are true is what saves you, and that's not what faith alone means. But it's not the topic of this video either. I'll discuss that later. And Protestants, however, also don't view the Bible as the sole source of any sort of truth, or as the ultimate source. They view the Bible as the sole source of authority in matters of faith and practice, not in everything, but specifically in matters of faith and practice. And the Protestants also believe that the churches the Protestants go to derive their authority specifically from the Bible. Catholics differ, though. To a Catholic, the Bible is, of course, sacred and infallible and true. But the Bible is only one of three sources of truth that a typical Catholic would appeal to. The second is sacred tradition, and the third is the magisterium of the Church. And Catholics also don't believe that the Church derives its authority from the Bible. Nor do they believe it derives its authority from the Bible and sacred tradition alone, and I leave out the magisterium because it would be rather silly to say that. Rather, they believe that the magisterium, sacred tradition, and the Bible all derive their authority from the Church. And the reason it's silly to say about the magisterium, as I would sacred tradition and the Bible, that the Church draws its authority from it, is because the magisterium is actually the clergy of the Church, specifically the bishops, held in conference or council. So, saying that the Church derives its authority from the Church would be silly. However, there is still a distinction between the Church itself and the magisterium, but I'll go into the differences later. The point that's being made here, though, is that they believe that the Church itself is what grants authority to the Bible. The Church itself is what grants authority to the sacred tradition. The Church itself is what grants authority to the magisterium. Rather than the Church deriving its authority from the Bible derives its authority from the Church. But therein lies the problem. For you see, the self-declared skeptic community that is really promoting secular humanism is largely unconcerned with facts and is rarely actually skeptical, especially of the claims of the skeptic community itself. They simply operate on the mythos that is generated within secular humanism and within the modern circles that they travel within atheism, that atheists are superior in intelligence, they're more moral, religion has caused violence, religion and science are at war with each other, atheists are, of course, the champions of science and reason and all that. And this predisposes them, along with a unique, specific hatred of Christianity, to believe various claims about Christianity that are simply not true, that help simplify the narrative, and that over time become integral to it. Explanations for how religion produces violence are not really questioned, they are simply accepted. Descriptions of what Christians believe and think like are simply accepted. And historical claims are simply accepted. And the problem happens when you see people bringing up actual challenges to what they're saying about themselves or about Christians. They will invariably attempt to dismiss the criticism, sidestep it, or contrive some sort of rationale that proves you wrong and them right all along, or else to claim that they never said what you claimed in the first place, while still holding on to the overall issue of religion being false and a lie, and how their beliefs are superior to yours and are true, and they never want to admit that they hold to a belief system that is itself the one that was believed by people who did horrible things, and they certainly don't want to admit that the beliefs they hold to ever led to any sort of evil in the world. They even call it the atheist atrocities fallacy if you do bring this up, as if it is a fallacy to think that anyone could be motivated by an atheistic belief system, or rather, a fallacy to think anyone can be motivated by atheism, which is a mere lack of belief in a god, to do evil, since people don't act on what they lack belief in. They say this even as they themselves act in the promotion of atheism and that understanding of what an atheist should be, discrediting their entire argument while they're making it. In reality, secular humanists may not like calling their beliefs a religion, but it is a religion. And a religion is not simply belief in supernaturalism and faith instead of reason and naturalism. Rather, a religion is simply a philosophy one lives by. There's no real distinction between philosophy and religion. We, in our modern world, created that distinction, and it's one that doesn't exist inherently. Religion is not more violent, nor less rational, nor inherently worse than philosophy. It is simply the same thing as philosophy, and while certain beliefs or practices may be more rational than others, what you still end up with is a range of how rational one's beliefs are, rather than something clear-cut like religion defining it for you. And what they really want when it comes to the self-declared skeptic community is not for people to think rationally or logically or to employ critical thinking. They don't want people to start using evidence-based thinking. What they want is for everyone to embrace secular humanism, whether or not they actually realize that's what they're doing. It's really about the promotion of specific beliefs and values and practices, not a lack of belief in a god, not reason, not science, not critical thinking, but ideology. An ideology they will not allow one to criticize or doubt, and that is supported by certain beliefs that you are also basically required to hold, and that will only be modified should it become necessary to do so to preserve the overall narrative. This is why, for example, you will hear about how it was not Christians, but atheists, agnostics, and deists, motivated by the Enlightenment and its ideals and the rights of man and Thomas Paine, that led to abolitionism, and only sometime later did some few Christians join, but even they were from radical liberal denominations, and even then they were a minority within their denominations, that all of the Christian churches, all of the denominations, supported slavery, and no church supported abolition until around 1840. This is done so that the atheist, agnostic, and deist can be shown to be superior to Christians. They were the ones fighting for abolition. And we don't learn about the free thought contribution and the rationalist contribution to abolition because we learn about this lie that it was Christians, even though Christians were the ones supporting slavery. They were the villains of history, we are told. Indeed, adding to their great villainy is the fact that they take credit for the work that the atheists, agnostics, and deists, motivated by the Enlightenment, did. They steal credit from when it was the Christian church, which didn't have a problem with slavery for centuries, that was actually promoting the institution. They take credit for ending it when it was really the Enlightenment and the atheists, agnostics, and deists who did. And of course, this isn't true. This is a lie. The truth is that it was Christians opposing it, not atheists, agnostics, and deists motivated by the Enlightenment. And even most of the names they claim were heroes fighting abolition who were not Christian, like William Lloyd Garrison or Susan B. Anthony or Garrett Smith, were actually Christians. But therein lies the problem, because they'll start out saying they're not Christians. And if you point out that they were, rather than admit that they were wrong, they'll say that they were radical Christians whose beliefs differed from mainstream Christianity, and will often say things like, they were closer to freethinkers than Christians, or closer to rationalists than Christians. But keep in mind, they earlier had said they were not Christians at all when they say this. So even if they are right, and they were not conventional Christians and were closer to atheists, which is what they really are talking about when they go with freethinker and rationalists, than they were to Christians, it still doesn't change the fact that they were Christians. And it's especially irritating since, according to their rationale, a certain Triple K organization can be used to blame all Christians for evil, even those that opposed it, even those that the Triple K hated. In fact, if you point out that the Triple K hated the Catholic Church and still hates the Catholic Church, what you'll get told is Christians have had centuries of hating and fighting other Christians. They act as if saying that makes it okay to blame all Christians, including Catholics, for the existence of the Triple K, because the Triple K have the same beliefs, and it's obviously their fault. But you are literally blaming people who they target. You're literally blaming the victims. And by the way, I'm not playing the victim. They really were the victims of Triple K violence. The Triple K actually did attack and even kill the Catholics. So it really is rather disgusting to blame Catholics on the Triple K and to blame other churches that opposed them and were often targeted on them, just because they both, in the words of the self-described rationalists, love Jesus. Them both loving Jesus does not make them the same. There's more to it than just loving Jesus. Just as claiming atheism is a lack of belief in a God, and claiming that no one ever does anything in the name of what they don't believe in, will not change the historical reality that communist countries who, according to the dogma of the holy religion of atheism, a name I give to their form of secular humanism, they will ignore that and say I called atheism a religion, that they killed in the name of communism, not atheism. In reality, they killed in order to promote an atheistic belief system, which means that atheism was indeed an inherent part of what they were doing, and further, they did what to eliminate belief in God. They were killing in the name of atheism. When you have a country that is officially state atheist, when you have a country that will not allow you to be in the government unless you are an atheist, will not allow you to work a government job unless you are an atheist, will not allow you to attend university unless you are an atheist, that mandates everyone go to public schools where religion is ridiculed and atheism promoted, that restricts religious freedom to certain given areas, and that will use various excuses to arrest and to exile and to send to mental institutions and even execute people for being overly religious, as they would call it, or for believing in a god. It is fairly obvious that the Soviets really did kill specifically to eliminate belief in God, and specifically to promote the belief that God did not exist. And keep in mind, contrary to the mythos that atheism has always been defined as a lack of belief in a god, and this is a 3,000-year-old definition going back to ancient Greek and the word atheos, the truth is Anthony Flew invented the lack of belief in a god definition in the 1970s. It is true he was influenced by 19th century free-thought works, but none of them actually defined atheism as a lack of belief in a god, no matter what popular atheist YouTubers may say. So the Soviets, before the 1970s, would not have been able to understand their atheism as a lack of belief in a god, and even after that, probably didn't care what a Westerner said anyway. But that's the point. Quite often, the modern-day skeptic community is not very skeptical about claims they read on atheist websites or hear on atheist YouTube channels. They believe without evidence whatever supports the mythology, and when something outside of them challenges the mythology, especially another atheist, they must defend it. With Christians, they will often just dismiss it as lies, or Jeebus, and all that other nonsense, as apologetics. But simply defining apologetics as dishonest does not prove that the statements that are being made are false. Then again, being critical of apologists, saying they're all dishonest, and telling us that you can't trust them for any information is what prevents the self-described skeptic from actually learning what Christians believe. And again, while they all, or at least most, claim to have been devout Christians until they read the Bible and became atheists, the truth is they don't really know what Christians believe. They don't understand the religion they're critical of. And they refuse to learn what Christians believe, even though they wish to persist in their criticism. But they also wish to believe that it was atheists, agnostics, and deists, especially after the Enlightenment, who brought about any positive reform and social change, and are the heroes of history, who of course go unsung because of the evil, lying, dishonest Christians taking all the credit for the advances of the atheist community, when in reality Christians have held back progress and brought about nothing but evil and degradation, when that isn't the reality that we see. Especially considering the same self-described skeptics insist nowadays that eugenics was actually pushed by the Christian church, and Christians and atheists, agnostics, and deists opposed it and recognized it was a pseudoscience. Or else they'll claim that there is a difference between positive and negative eugenics, and freethinkers and rationalists promoted negative eugenics, which was a belief that children born of parents who loved each other and who were desired, children of parents who loved them, would grow up healthier and more intelligent. Negative eugenics there was nothing wrong with, and it was that which the rationalists and freethinkers promoted. It was actually Christians promoting positive eugenics, of sterilizing the unfit and creating a master race. And of course, you can tell all of this is not really true either, since if you actually look at what negative eugenics was, it is not simply a belief that children who are born of parents who love each other and who want children and are loved will grow up healthier and more intelligent. Negative eugenics was an effort to prevent the unfit from breeding, just as positive eugenics was an effort to allow the fit to breed. The better stock would be placed with other better stock, and you would select who breeds with who based upon certain characteristics in positive eugenics. As Richard Dawkins said, as he's promoting essentially eugenics, if you want a better runner, you breed with other runners. If you want a better mathematician, you breed with people skilled with mathematics. You breed people for the professions they do. That would be positive eugenics, and negative eugenics would be sterilizing people who you deemed as unfit and who would produce dysgenic children. It isn't really true that negative eugenics, as Atheist Scholar and other sites say, is a belief that children born of parents who love each other and who wanted children and grow up loved will grow up healthier and more intelligent. That is not what negative eugenics actually was. But at least Atheist Scholar did not try and deny freethinkers and rationalists, as they called themselves, promoted eugenics, like P.Z. Meyer did, who claimed that eugenics was a creationist pseudoscience that was presented as an alternative to evolution, claiming that evolution is dependent on the belief in natural selection, and people who believed in eugenics denied the existence of natural selection, believing in artificial selection and calling it a form of intelligent design, when in reality artificial selection simply means not allowing the blind forces of nature to play out without any sort of planning, and to seize power over our evolution. People who believed in eugenics, and still believe in eugenics, do not deny natural selection exists. They simply believe that through artificial selection we can do a better job than blind nature could. And that is the problem, because if you actually read free thought materials from prior to World War II, many of them support the beliefs that would go into the third kingdom of our dear, dear, dear Mr. Wolf. He's using an alias because of Al Gore and his rhythm. And you will find that it was not centuries of Christian anti-Elvinism that led to the great conflagration, the number two, but rather the ideas of people like Herbert Spencer, Karl Pearson, and Henry Lapland. You will find that rather than being inspired by Christian beliefs, the acts of the third Richter in Germania were actually motivated by a firm belief in science. I am not saying that, though, to vilify science, but at the same time, we can't just assume that science good, religion bad, and pretend that science has never been used to do evil. And by used to do evil, I don't just mean developing weapons and technology. That ideas and philosophies rooted in a deep belief in science have not motivated evil. The problem, of course, is not with science in general, but with specific beliefs. But the same can be true of religion. The idea that religion is inherently evil or inherently violent, while science is inherently good and can only be corrupted into evil by introducing outside forces to it, is itself rather silly. In the end, we are dealing with something more complex than science versus religion, and we are dealing with something more complex than the idea that religion is inherently violent. We're simply dealing, though, with ultimately collections of beliefs, not one big thing called religion or one big thing called science. And what people do with various individual ideas is that they put them together with other ideas, and this forms their belief system. And it simply isn't true that if someone is a Christian, he believes in all the same things that Christians do, which is acknowledged, of course, by people who follow the holy religion of I have no religion because I'm an atheist, but only to justify any argument they use. Because let's face reality, they act as if following religion will inevitably lead to certain things, and it simply doesn't lead to those things. They say that Christians believe certain specific things and will inevitably lead to certain things, and that's not true either. There is no reason, for instance, to think that being an atheist would make one not racist. There is no reason to think I believe in science will make you not a racist. There is no reason whatsoever to believe that being a Christian will make you racist, or that the Bible is racist, even with all those supposedly racist Bible verses that no one thought of as racist until, well, the modern-day atheist community. Even people in the 19th century arguing for slavery did not use the verses they claim are obviously racist. And that's the thing. You're ultimately not determining what people will do based on their actual beliefs. You are generalizing all Christians and ultimately all religious people and acting as though they believe certain things and will behave a certain way when they very clearly don't, whilst doing the same thing with atheists. Oddly enough, though, the same atheist community will criticize people for generalizing all atheists. At the same time, that's exactly what they do. But still, does anyone really think the sort of atheist who does nothing but criticize Christianity all the time is going to produce a world that is better and less hateful and more tolerant? How can we be intolerant of religion and still say we have a tolerant society? I realize the point is that religion is inherently intolerant, but it's not. There's no reason to believe it is. There's no reason to believe people like Sam Harris when they say it is. And there's no reason to think that the only reason we have tolerant religious people is because of secularism and how tolerant religious people are the product of scriptural ignorance and secular values. As the divine prophet Sam Harris, most holy speaker of reason and truth and the word of no God, had said. In reality, tolerance and intolerance are not simply the result of whether or not one is religious or not, especially since the same divine prophet, most holy Sam Harris, himself advocated that we should be intolerant of religious people. His basic rationale being religion is intolerant, therefore we should not tolerate it. It's ridiculous, but he was literally arguing that the tolerance of a secular society cannot exist with religion, so it has to be intolerant to protect tolerance, all while denying religion can be tolerant and saying that religious people who are tolerant are religious people who don't take their religion seriously and are really secularists. And it's nonsense. That's not really the truth either. But that is the point, isn't it? They never quite realize that the history that they believe in is false. They never quite realize that what they're saying is not true. Because they can't realize that. Because they don't want to realize that. They insist on not realizing that. And that is why they have to present a very false view of history as well to go with it. I believe I've said enough on this topic, though, so I shall take my leave of you. Thank you. Before I do that, I will apologize for the oddity of my speech patterns of late. As I've stated, it is due to a certain necessity that has been inflicted upon me. I am trying to create a better balance between understandability and oddity and distortion. I am still working on it. I'm hoping this is at least a little better than my other efforts, but thank you for your patience with it. And I shall take my leave. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.